Although you could be forgiven for thinking so, the two vehicles beside me are not identical. This one is the all-new BMW X7, and this one is the redesigned BMW X5. Now, the two vehicles are closely related, but let's talk about what's going on here. For this model year, BMW has decided that the X5 will now be only a two-row crossover in America. So this is a step above the BMW X3 in overall size and in overall luxury, but it's a two-row vehicle, so that means we get more cargo room in the back. The X7, on the other hand, is a three-row vehicle only, and this is considerably larger than the X5. This has been designed to compete very directly with the Mercedes-Benz GLS. The GLS is very important to keep in mind when thinking about the X7, because this again was designed to be a Mercedes competitor, not really an Audi or Volvo competitor. So this is significantly more expensive in base form than a Q7 or an XC90. How much more expensive? Well, the base X7 with the 3-liter 6-cylinder engine is going to be about $20,000 more than a base Q7, and significantly more even than that versus the Volvo XC90. So this really is playing in a different arena. Up front, the family resemblance between this and the X5 is instantly noticeable, but the X7 does have this much larger grille up front. Some have said that this looks a little bit too hungry, and I have to say that in the original photos, I was a little bit unsure how I thought about this large grille, but in person, it definitely looks a little bit better than I had expected. We have the laser LED headlamps over here on the side, fog lamps down below, and a slightly different treatment to the overall bumper than what we see in the X5 to help the two models get a little bit distinguished from one another. There is a 360-degree camera right there in the middle. The X7 is 203.3 inches long, making this right about the same size as a Cadillac Escalade, so this is definitely a big three-row crossover in America. In contrast, the X5 is almost 10 inches shorter at 194.3 inches long. The X5 right behind me is about the same size overall as a Volvo XC90. But what confuses a few people about the X5 is that, again, it is a two-row vehicle. It's not exactly a direct XC90 competitor, even though it's right about the same size, mainly because of the lack of that third row back there. When you approach the X7, one of the things you'll notice immediately is the size of this rear door back here. This is absolutely enormous compared to the X5. That's because when they were designing this vehicle, they decided to keep the front door and that front quarter panel about the same size overall as the X5, and then they stretched the wheelbase way out, but they wanted the seam for the door to end up in exactly the same place. So we have that really, really big door back there, and then we have a big window back here because, again, we do have that third row. Again, out back, the X7 looks like a variant of the X5. We do have different tail lamps that are not quite as roundy. They're definitely a little bit more square, a little bit more linear. And then we have quad exhaust tips down there at the bottom. We are driving the model with the twin-turbo V8 back here. Very much like the X5, we have the split opening tailgate, which I've always been a fan of. So we have a lift gate up here, and then we have a tailgate below. This makes it a lot handier if you want to take your X7 tailgating. This has always been one of my favorite features about the X5. Both the tailgate and the liftgate are powered, and they're powered for both opening and closing. So you press one button, the bottom closes, and then the lid closes right on top of it. At the moment, the X7 and the X5 have exactly the same engine lineup in America. Things start out with a 3-liter inline-6 turbocharged engine that produces 335 horsepower. The next engine up is the one that we have in this one today. It's a 4.4-liter twin-turbo V8, produces 456 horsepower. If 456 horsepower isn't enough for you, BMW tells us to expect more powerful X7s coming soon, but they've also said that they're not going to be making an X7M at the moment. So if you want the M treatment on your BMW crossover, the X5M is coming up soon. We don't know too many details about it, but don't expect an X7M. We may perhaps get, however, a 560 or 580 horsepower twin-turbo V8 from one of the other BMW models shoved under this hood. The other engine that we don't have any details yet, but you should expect, is a plug-in hybrid engine under this hood. We do know that there will be one coming up in the X5. You should expect that same engine to happen under here at some point. Just as you'd expect out of a vehicle with a $120,000 price tag, this X7 has very comfortable front seats. This has the optional multi-way adjustable drivers and front passenger seat. Seat back adjusts for curvature. We have a powered thigh extension, inflatable bolsters, 4-way adjustable lumbar support, and an active seat massage feature. It's activated via a button right over there on the door. Hopping into the second row, we definitely find some of the most comfortable second row seats that you'll find out there. A lot of 3-row crossovers sacrifice second row comfort for second row practicality, for having these seats fold and contort in a bunch of different ways. In this X7, we actually have a powered second row seat, which is really kind of an interesting touch. The recline mechanism allows us a pretty decent amount of recline, but not as much recline as we find in the front seats, and then the whole seat can be moved forward and backward to help apportion space overall a little bit more equitably. There's also a button down there on the seat to return everything to more of a neutral seating position to allow people to get in and out more easily. Moving over to the other side, you can see that we definitely have a large amount of legroom over here left. This front seat was adjusted for a taller passenger up front. We also have some nice touches like powered sunshades over here on the side, and I can also use the buttons on the side control panel here to open and close the sunshades for the moonroof in the front and the moonroof right back there over the third row. And finally, we find two different climate zones right back here for the second row passengers, along with USB charge ports. Hopping into the third row is pretty easy. Even though these are powered second row seats, they do have a tilt mechanism right like that, and then the power functionality takes over, tilts and moves them up front, and it will actually even move the front row seat if it needs to in order to have this second row seat move even further forward. Moving back here into the third row, we find a reasonable amount of room, but not quite as much as some of those very, very large three-row vehicles out there. Sitting very upright back here, my hair is brushing the ceiling, but most importantly, my head is not touching the ceiling. So this is a much more comfortable third row than we found in the X5. Also an interesting touch back here, we actually have a 5-zone climate control system, so up here we actually have climate controls just for the third row. This X7 is a 6-passenger vehicle, so we have the captain's chairs in the middle, 2 chairs right back here, and then 2 chairs up front. From this angle, you can see that the second row seats have height adjustable shoulder belts, kind of an odd touch because the front row does not. Perhaps the most unusual thing you'll notice back here is the overall level of detail and the parts quality back here. This is really quite unusual because we have the suede headliner coming down here on this pillar and on the back pillar right there. We have a lot of stitched materials going on, and in most 3-row crossovers, even in the luxury segment, plastics get hard back here because a lot of folks will keep the third row folded most of the time. On the positive side, this is going to be an awful lot more comfortable for folks back here in the third row because there's a soft, squishy armrest right there, cup holders on each side, and even a little bit of real wood trim. But on the downside, if you do keep your third row seats folded most of the time and you have luggage bashing around back here, this leather may get a little bit worn. The third row seats are powered, so there's actually some buttons right next to me and on the other side that you can use to raise and lower those third row seats. You can again do that from in here or from back there in the cargo area. Behind the hatch, we find 12.8 cubic feet of storage space behind the third row. Now, if you fold the third row, which again you can do via some buttons right over here on this side, then we get 48 cubic feet of storage space, which is actually above what we find in the BMW X5. That's logical, of course, because again, this is a bigger vehicle overall. On the left side of the cargo area, we have an interesting button bank here. We have a button that will fold down the third row seats and adjust the second row seats for maximum cargo capacity. We then have a button that says max room right here for passengers. So if I press that button, it will actually pop the third row back into place. We then have some individual controls for the folding third row seats and the second row seats as well. You can actually move them forward and backward via buttons back here in the cargo area. Under the cargo area load floor, we have some additional storage space right down there, and we have a roller cargo cover. You can actually pull the side panels off, right like that, pull this roller cargo cover out, and then install it in a position right back there for the third row seats, and it would cover that entire cargo area. Moving to the inside, again, we don't have height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger. I find that a little bit unusual. Since we have the up-level sound system, we actually have a tweeter right there above that B-pillar location. We have this large panoramic moonroof that goes right back there to over the second row passengers' heads, and then we actually have a small third moonroof right back there for the third row passengers. You can just barely see it right from that angle. The model that we've been driving today has this optional interior upgrade package. The seats are a two-tone design, ivory and navy blue, and then the headliner, you can see right there on the B pillar, actually matches or coordinates with those seats. That's actually a navy color right there, so you can see there's a different color right down there at the bottom of the post. That navy leather continues on over to the doors and dashboard. This does have the optional leather wrap doors and leather wrap dash. There are a lot of premium materials going on in this cabin, and the level of attention to detail and the quality of these parts is consistent all the way back there to the third row, where again we have a lot of that stitched material I talked about earlier. As we move on over to the dashboard, the overall design is basically the same as the X5. This is just a little bit larger overall, but the same things are continuing here. So we have the latest touchscreen BMW iDrive system right here in the dashboard, Sirius XM. We also have Apple CarPlay integration, and that CarPlay integration is wireless. There's a center channel speaker above that. There's a button to enable and disable all the vehicle's safety systems. You can choose between all on, individual, or all off as well if you prefer. I do like the fact that that's a really quick one-touch system to enable and disable those features. We have the controls for the 2 front climate control zones right there. Some dedicated memory buttons down here. These are touch sensitive, so if you run your finger across them, you'll actually see what that option is for. Physical power and volume knob, track forward, backward, right over there. Below that, we have a storage cubby with a roller lid. There's a wireless charging mat right at the back there. You can see my phone is charging at the moment. 2 large cup holders in there and a USB input. Moving back from that, we have more real wood trim down here, and then a very shiny button bank that's a little bit difficult to capture on camera. There's a button for the traction control system, the 360-degree camera system, parking sensors, button to turn off the auto start-stop system, engine start-stop, the actual shifter itself here. This is a crystal design, which is a little bit different than the X5. There's a park button right there up front. That's how you park it. Over here we have some direct access buttons for the iDrive system, and then a crystal iDrive controller. That's kind of an interesting twist as well. Controls for the adaptive height air suspension system right there. Progress control, and then the drive mode controls for the car. These control the engine, suspension, and the transmission. The armrest between the driver and front passenger opens in a bifold fashion, and there's a USB-C charge-only port inside. Over on the driver's side, we have a full LCD instrument cluster. This isn't quite as visually impressive as some of Audi's latest designs, but you can see that it is still an attractive display. It's definitely more fully featured than what we've seen from BMW in the past. The design theme is adjustable, and it will change based on your driving mode, and then you can also change what you see in that right-hand quadrant there, whether you want to get information from the audio system, trip computer readouts, etc. The display is a little bit difficult to film in strong sunlight, but the glare is actually not very obvious when you're in person. On camera, you can see some flashing dots right here. This is the driver attention monitoring system. These actually are not visible to the human eye, but the camera does see them right there. The steering wheel is a 3-spoke design. We have pretty aggressive sport grips up top, shift paddles behind, and then BMW's latest button banks. On the left side, we have the controls for the radar adaptive cruise control system. There's also a speed limit button if you'd rather use that. On the right side, we have the controls for the infotainment system. There's a mode change button that works with the heads-up display in our particular model, and a voice command button right over there. To the left of the driver, we have some buttons to adjust the second row seats, slide them forward and backward. There's also a seat massage button right there, and then a button to control the passenger seat up front from the driver's seat controls. The first thing you'll notice about the X7 out on the road is that it definitely drives bigger than the X5. It's also heavier, around 400 to 600 pounds heavier, depending on the version that you're looking at. Now that's not comparing rear-wheel drive to all-wheel drive, because both the X5 and the X7 are all-wheel drive only in the United States. Curb weight obviously affects overall acceleration, so the X7 is not as quick as the X5 with the same engines. BMW claims 5.8 seconds for the base engine, 5.2 seconds 0 to 60 for the optional V8. Compared with the X5, that means that the X7 should be about half a second slower 0 to 60 overall. However, in our recent test of the BMW X5, it actually managed to beat the manufacturer's estimates, something that we've come to expect out of BMW, so I suspect that regardless of the engine you choose, the X7 is going to be a little bit faster than advertised, assuming you're doing this at sea level. Those numbers put the X7 pretty close to its natural competitor, the Mercedes GLS. The inline-6 engine is going to be a little bit faster than the GLS 450. It will go 0 to 60 in about 6.5 seconds, and the V8s are right about the same overall 0 to 60 time. In our initial braking test out here in Washington, we stopped from 60 miles an hour back to 0 in 110 feet, which was actually a little bit surprising because that was actually shorter than the BMW X5 we recently had, even though this is notably heavier. I suspect this may have to do something with the weight balance and the overall tire selections that we had on each of these vehicles. We'll know a little bit more when we get the X7 back at home and run it through our usual battery of tests. Even without being home, however, I can tell you that the X7 definitely drives bigger than the X5. It feels a little bit larger. It definitely feels softer as well. Both the X7 that we're driving today and the X5 that we had to compare it back to back with, and the one that we did our full weekly review on, had the optional adaptive air suspension. The air suspension definitely adds to the substantial feeling that we see in both the X5 and the X7 in their latest versions, but it also greatly improves the overall ride quality. If sharp handling is what you're interested in, you might want to skip the air suspension because it does add a little bit of body lean, a little bit of tip and dive to the X7 that it normally wouldn't have if you just chose the base suspension design. But personally, I think that the air suspension is right in keeping with the overall theme of the X7. This is a large and in-charge SUV, and the air suspension just makes a lot of sense here, especially if you're carrying passengers in the back. The air suspension system is an adaptive system, so it will firm things up when you put it into sport mode, soften things out a little bit when you put it into comfort mode. It also is an adaptable height suspension, so it can raise the vehicle up and it can lower it down for easier entry and better aero out on the highway. The overall suspension movement is about 1.6 inches, which is definitely less than we see in Range Rover or Grand Cherokee models because the mission of the X7 is a little bit different. Although this will give you a little bit better clearance if you're going to take your X7 a little bit off the beaten path. This is not designed to be a rock crawler, so that's why we don't see that next level in suspension lift here. Another feature our tester had on it that you should know about is the optional 4-corner steering system, and I think this really is a must-have with the X7. There are two main benefits to the 4-corner steering system. The first thing is that it shrinks the turning circle by about 3 feet or so, putting the X7 on par with the BMW X3. The second thing that it can do is it can help stabilize quick maneuvers out on the highway. So if you're doing a rapid lane change responding to an emergency, it'll actually make the vehicle feel a little bit more stable in those situations. For our official cabin noise score, you will have to wait until we can get our hands on the X7 for a full week. However, I suspect that it's going to likely be either the same as the X5 or perhaps a little bit quieter. And the last X5 we tested was actually one of the quietest vehicles we've had in a long time, right around 69 decibels or so. When it comes to overall fuel economy, there's a pretty big delta between the inline-6 and the twin-turbo V8. According to the EPA, the 3-liter inline-6 should get you 22 miles per gallon average. That drops down to 17 for the 4.4. That's 1 mpg below the Lincoln Navigator, which actually surprised me a little bit, but it is 1 mile per gallon better than the current generation GLS 550. That means that if you're interested in overall efficiency, you should definitely stick with the base engine. That does beat the GLS 450 by around 4 miles per gallon. We don't know too many details about a possible plug-in hybrid coming to the X7 just yet, but I suspect that we will get the new 45e plug-in hybrid system that we expect to get in the X5 next year. According to BMW, that system is good for around 50 miles of EV range. It should also be about 0.2 of a second faster than the base engine and will likely get around 24 to 25 miles per gallon. But we won't know more about that until we actually see it under the hood of the X5, coming either later in 2019 or early 2020. At that point, we may know more about whether or not it will ever make its way into the X7. Bottom line out on the road, the X7 is a quiet and comfortable luxury crossover. This definitely feels a little bit more nimble, a little bit better put together than what we see from the Cadillac Escalade or the Lincoln Navigator, because the X7 really is a true crossover. It's that unibody vehicle, so it has the driving dynamics that you'd expect out of a BMW sedan with a bigger box on top. The Navigator, the QX80, and the Escalade, on the other hand, even though they do drive very well for body-on-frame vehicles, definitely have a more truck-like feel to them out on the road. And now to the nitty-gritty. How much will an X7 set you back? This starts at $73,900, which is significantly more expensive than this X5 right here, which started at $60,700. For those price tags, both models will have the inline-6 turbocharged engine and standard all-wheel drive, but only the X7 will get that large, comfortable third-row seat in the back. We also get significantly more overall room, especially when that third-row seat is folded. Now, in terms of overall interior trappings, the two models are very, very similar from the driver's perspective in that base model. So again, that $13,000 really is just buying you the third row and the extra room that we have in the X7. If you want the 4.4-liter twin-turbo V8, that will start at $92,600, and as equipped right here, this came in right around $120,000. That may sound like an awful lot of cash, and indeed, it truly is an awful lot of cash, but this is exactly the same pricing range as the current generation Mercedes-Benz GLS. And when I'm talking about the GLS, I am of course talking about the 2018-2019 model, the one that you can buy today. The new 2020 model is likely going to be a little bit more expensive, but still a very direct BMW X7 competitor. That puts these two vehicles in a very different category all to themselves, because they are significantly more expensive and significantly nicer, especially in the third row, than something like the Volvo XC90 or the Audi Q7. There's also a little bit more room on the inside because of the overall length. Again, about 203 inches long for this model. That's notably longer than an XC90, which is about the same size as the X5 that's parked next to this. In terms of overall interior dimensions, the X7 and the GLS are actually pretty close to the Lincoln Navigator, even though the Navigator is a little bit larger on the outside. That's because this, like the GLS, is a unibody crossover, not a body-on-frame SUV. and that results in a lot more efficient packaging overall. So the overall vehicle could be closer to the ground, and if you look at the inside of the vehicle, the step in height is an awful lot lower than the Navigator because we don't have a frame sandwiched between the inside of the car and the outside of the vehicle. Be sure and stay tuned for our full review on the X7 coming up just as soon as we possibly can. We should have this for a full weekly review coming up over the next few months. In the meantime, hit that subscribe button down there at the bottom of your screen so you can be updated on all of our latest videos. And if you haven't already done so, find us over at facebook.com/AlexNautos. I'll see you later.